My name is Sarah Roswell. I was 31, walking down Route 11 with a swollen knee and my 11-month-old daughter on my hip, when my father's truck pulled up beside me. My mother-in-law had taken my car 6 months earlier. My husband had taken my phone that same morning. And for half a year, the woman who claimed to love my daughter like her own had been quietly building a legal case to take her away from me. She had a doctor willing to call me unstable. She had my car title locked in a desk drawer. She had church friends who believed every word she said. What she didn't know was that I'd been keeping records of my own. 52 entries, dated and signed, written the way I write everything, like a nurse charting a patient. And what happened in court the next morning made the whole room go silent. If you've ever been told to be grateful for the bare minimum, stay with me. By the time I understood what was happening, leaving wasn't the hard part. The hard part was leaving with my daughter. My mother died of cancer when I was 14. 6 months after her funeral, I was standing at her grave holding my little brother's hand while he asked when Mom was coming home. My dad was the county sheriff, working doubles, grieving alone in his truck before he ever walked through the door. So I cooked, packed lunches, kept the house quiet enough that he could finally sit down at 9 and close his eyes. That's where it started, the belief that if I just worked hard enough, stayed organized enough, I could hold anything together. I became a nurse, working 12-hour shifts, coming home to a clean apartment and a budget taped to my fridge. Then I met Anthony at the hardware store. Calloused hands, easy laugh, carried my paint cans without being asked. He felt like home. He never talked about his father, and I never asked why. I thought I knew what a good man looked like. He took me to meet his mother that spring. The house sat at the end of a gravel road, white siding, green shutters, a porch swing that didn't swing because the chains were locked. Lorraine opened the door before we knocked. 60 years old, silver hair pinned tight, a dish towel folded over her shoulder like a uniform. The kitchen smelled like bleach, the kind that means someone scrubbed until the surface forgot what used to be there. She had assigned seats. She handed me water without asking. She already knew the name of my nursing program, my supervisor, my hourly pay. Anthony must have told her everything. Over dinner she smiled and said how nice it was Anthony had finally brought home someone useful. When I offered to help with dishes, she put her hand on my wrist, light but precise, like a blood pressure cuff clicking shut. "Oh honey, you don't need to do that. You should be grateful we welcome you here." She said welcome the way a landlord says a lease. I heard it like a smoke detector going off in someone else's house, distant, not yet my problem. I should have paid closer attention. We married that October. Small country church, my dad walking me down the aisle, Lorraine crying in the front row. I thought it was joy. Anthony suggested we move into his mother's house, just until we saved for a down payment. 6 months, tops. The first 3 months were fine. Lorraine cooked, cleaned, brought fresh towels without being asked. I told myself this was generosity. Then small things shifted. My car key disappeared from the hook by the door. Lorraine said she'd moved it, for safekeeping. A week later it was in her purse. After that I stopped asking, she or Anthony drove me everywhere. She suggested I put my paycheck into a joint household account, and Anthony agreed before I could even answer. When I said I wanted to keep my own account, Anthony looked at his mother, Lorraine looked at me, and said sweetly, "Of course, honey. If that's what you need." That night Anthony told me I'd embarrassed his mother. I apologized. When I tried to open my own account online, I realized the nearest bank was 8 miles away, and I no longer had a car. My dad visited that December. Lorraine had the house staged, cookies, candles, me in a sweater she'd picked out without asking. She controlled every pause, refilling my dad's coffee before it was half empty. I sat there wanting to say, "Dad, something is wrong," but she never left the room. On his way out he noticed the empty driveway. "Where's your car?" "Anthony's been driving her," Lorraine answered before I could. "Saves gas." Dad looked at me. I nodded. He didn't push, that was his way. But on the porch he hugged me and said, "You know my number. You call anytime." Anytime means 3 in the morning, too. I watched his truck disappear down the road. When I turned around, Lorraine was already washing his mug. By February I was pregnant, and Lorraine said, a mother's place is with her child. The hospital can wait. When I said I wanted to keep working, Anthony just said, Mom knows best. She raised me right, like a label he'd stopped noticing was even there. A week later I learned Lorraine had already called my supervisor and told them I was on medical leave. She hadn't asked me, she informed me afterward, smiling, oh honey, I already spoke with Nancy. She understands. That same week, my phone battery started draining in 4 hours instead of 12. I knew exactly what a hidden tracking app looked like in the settings, and there it was, running location services around the clock, an app one never installed. When I asked Belle, Anthony's sister, about it, she just blinked. I don't know what you're talking about. When I went to Lorraine, she tilted her head with soft concern. Honey, are you sure you're not being a little paranoid? Maybe we should call Dr. Mercer about a postpartum screening. That was the moment I understood, if I reacted, they'd use it against me. So I said nothing. But it wasn't surrender. It was strategy. The next morning, my father's number had been deleted from my contacts. Lily was born that August. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, my eyes, Anthony's chin. Holding her, I understood what unconditional really costs, everything. Lorraine arrived 40 minutes later, not because anyone called her, but because Belle had texted her. She picked Lily up before I'd even finished the first feeding. My granddaughter, she told the nurse. Not their daughter. Mine. When I tried calling my dad from the hospital phone, Belle sweetly said, we should let Donna rest, she's exhausted, and took the phone from my hand. Over the next 6 weeks, Lorraine controlled everything, when Lily ate, slept, who held her, even taping a feeding chart to the fridge like Lily was a patient and Lorraine was the charge nurse. A registered nurse, told how to care for her own baby by a woman who thought Tylenol cured everything. Then Dr. Mercer came by, Lorraine's physician and church friend. He checked the baby for 3 minutes, then turned to me. Donna, how have you been feeling? Any trouble sleeping? Crying spells? I recognized the questions instantly, a standard depression screening, but weaponized, the questions leading. Lorraine stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. I answered the way I'd chart my own assessment, bonding excellent, sleep disrupted as expected for a 6-week-old, distress level 3 out of 10, within normal range. He blinked, clearly not used to a patient who could grade her own exam. Lorraine jumped in. She's very good at hiding it, doctor. You should see her at night. I looked at her. No warmth. Pure calculation. He wrote something down and left. I watched him drive away and understood, she wasn't guessing about me. She was building a file. The danger wasn't Lorraine's temper. It was her patience. By November, my world had shrunk to that house and a 1/4 acre of yard. No car, no job, no phone, Belle had accidentally dropped it in the sink. My paycheck sat in a joint account I couldn't touch alone. My dad called every Sunday, Lorraine always answered, Donna's napping, I'll tell her you called, Ray, and never did. I only found out because Anthony mentioned it offhand. Mom handles the phone, he shrugged. One evening I borrowed his phone while he showered and texted a former coworker, just one line, asking if my position was still open. He caught me. Why are you texting people behind my back? Lorraine appeared at the top of the stairs. Anthony, honey, I told you she'd do this, she said gently, like a prediction confirmed. I went upstairs in silence. That night, through the floor vent, I heard her unlock a desk drawer in the study below. Something rustled. The drawer closed. The lock clicked. Meanwhile, Belle worked on everyone around us, slow and invisible, like erosion. She told the women at church I wasn't up for visitors. She told the store clerk I was resting at home, the baby's been a lot. One by one, anyone who might have knocked on our door stopped knocking. I overheard her on the phone, I'm worried about her, honestly. She barely leaves her room. I stood there listening to someone describe my life in a version I didn't recognize. When I confronted her quietly, she just smiled, the kind that never reaches the eyes. "I'm just looking out for you, sis. We're family." 2 days later I found photos on Lorraine's phone. Belle had been sending them. Me with unwashed hair, dark circles, formula stains, candid shots from doorways I didn't know were open. Captions like, "Tuesday, 2 p.m., didn't shower again." A gallery of a woman falling apart. But I wasn't falling apart. I was being disassembled, piece by piece. That night I started writing. A spiral notebook, hidden inside a box of maxi pads under the bathroom sink, the one place Lorraine never inventoried. I wrote in the same format I used at work: subjective, objective, assessment, plan. Entry 1 documented everything: the car, the deleted contacts, the cancelled job, the tracking app, the locked accounts, all of it matching, almost word for word, the legal definition of coercive control. I wrote while Lorraine scrubbed the counter 4 feet away, bleach so strong my eyes watered. For the first time since my car key disappeared, I didn't flinch. I was doing something she couldn't wipe away. That Sunday at church, Lorraine carried Lily in a white dress she'd bought without asking me, glowing as women complimented her. "Being a grandmother is God's greatest blessing," she told them. The pastor called her a wonderful family woman. I stood 3 feet behind her, saying nothing. A woman touched my elbow. "Are you okay, honey? Lorraine mentioned you've been struggling." I smiled. "I'm doing great, thank you for asking." Walking to the car, Lorraine squeezed my shoulder, how firm, precise. "See? Everyone's so worried about you, Donna. We just want to help." A reminder of exactly where the leash attached. Then, across the lot, I watched Dr. Mercer meet Lorraine at her car. She handed him a manila envelope. He tucked it under his arm and drove off. I sat thinking about that locked drawer, that envelope, and the 23 entries in my notebook nobody in this car knew existed. If you've ever watched someone take credit for the very life they were suffocating, you know this feeling. It's not anger. It's clarity. And clarity is the most dangerous thing a woman like Lorraine can hand someone like me. Lily's 4-month checkup was the one appointment Lorraine never fought. Skipping vaccines would look bad, and Lorraine never let anything look bad. She drove us, then waited outside with the engine running. That gave me my chance. I'd noticed months earlier that the study key lived taped under the kitchen junk drawer, hidden only from people who weren't looking. With Lorraine at Bible study, Anthony on a job site, and Belle in the basement with headphones on, I let myself into the study. The locked drawer held Lily's immunization card on top, what I'd come for. But underneath was an unlabeled folder, heavier than it should have been. Inside, a printed petition for emergency custody of Lily, dated less than 2 weeks earlier, citing postpartum psychosis, and a risk to the child, unsigned, but ready. My car title, in my name, the one Lorraine had told me was, at the DMV. It had never left this drawer. And a letter from Dr. Mercer to a county judge, describing his professional concerns about my mental health, a family physician, not a psychiatrist, with no authority to make that diagnosis at all. My hands weren't shaking from fear. They were shaking with recognition. This wasn't a family worried about me. This was a case file, and I was the defendant in a trial I didn't know had started. I found an old digital camera with no tracking software, photographed every page, put everything back exactly as I found it, and walked past that empty key hook on my way upstairs. For 6 months I'd looked at that hook and felt loss. Now I felt something else. I was looking at evidence. That night I added it all to my notebook, 47 entries now, including a note that Dr. Mercer's diagnosis was completely outside his scope of practice. I needed a lawyer. But I couldn't call one from any phone in that house. My chance came at Lily's real immunization appointment the next week. While Lorraine waited in the car, I found a quiet phone near the back office and called the Virginia Family Violence Hotline. 2 minutes and 40 seconds later, I had the name and number of Margaret Hale, a domestic violence attorney. I memorized it on the walk back. Over the next 2 weeks, I called Margaret 4 times, from the pediatrician's office, a courtesy phone at the grocery store while Bella supervised, and twice from my elderly neighbor's kitchen, telling Lorraine I was just borrowing eggs. I read Margaret all 52 entries. She was quiet a moment, then said, "This is the most organized documentation of coercive control I've ever received. You wrote it like medical records." I told her, "I am medical records." Margaret laid out the plan. First, I needed to physically leave the house before we filed anything, or retaliation would be immediate. Second, once out, file for an emergency protective order, citing the pattern of isolation, financial control, surveillance, medical gaslighting. Third, simultaneously petition for temporary sole custody, with my log as the centerpiece. Then she added the line that put a clock on everything: "If Lorraine files first, you'll be defending instead of acting. We need to move within the week." Lorraine noticed the change in me, 6 months of watching a woman fold inward, and now I was standing straighter, sleeping better. "You seem different, Donna," she said one morning. "Almost cheerful," I said. Lily slept well. She tightened the leash immediately, no more solo trips, bell within arm's reach, the desk drawer checked, another home visit, scheduled with Dr. Mercer. That night, through the study door, I heard Lorraine on the phone. "I think we should file that petition this week, before she does something rash." I stood frozen in the dark hallway. Margaret's clock wasn't ticking anymore. It was ringing. The next morning, I woke before everyone, dressed Lily, and packed a small bag of diapers, formula, my notebook wrapped in plastic, tucked under the stroller blanket by the door. At 8, I picked up Lily and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Anthony asked. "Taking Lily for a walk. Mom said you should stay inside. Dr. Mercer's coming. I'll be back before then." I stepped toward the door. Anthony moved into the frame, deliberately, blocking it. I tried to step around him. He grabbed my arm, hard, and pulled. My foot caught the frame, my knee cracked against the wood, and I went down, twisting to keep Lily off the floor. Pain shot up my leg. Lily screamed. I stood. Anthony let go, staring at his own hand. I didn't wait. I grabbed the bag, scooped Lily up, and pushed past him out the door. He didn't follow. Route 11 ran through the valley, gravel shoulders, the asphalt already radiating heat. I limped, my knee swelling fast and hot, the kind of swelling I documented on 100 patient charts. Lily sat quiet on my hip, her fist around my collar. I headed toward town, 3 miles away. My dad's house was 12, too far with a baby and a bad knee. About 20 minutes in, I heard the engine. A blue Ford pickup I knew like my own heartbeat. It slowed alongside me, the window rolled down. My dad looked at me, at Lily, at my knee swollen to twice its size. His jaw tightened, the same way it had at my mother's funeral. "Don Abel. Where's your car?" "My mother-in-law took it," I said. "Said I should be grateful they let me live there." He was quiet. Then, "Get in." A pause. "This ends tonight." The car seat was already in the back, he'd kept it there since Lily was born, just in case. He drove. After 5 silent minutes, "Tell me everything." So I did. At his kitchen table that evening, I told him all of it. He listened the way he listened to every report in 30 years on the job, hands folded, eyes steady. He asked only 2 questions. "Did he hit you?" He grabbed my arm. I fell. "And, is Lily safe right now?" "She's in your living room, Dad." "She's safe." That evening he called Margaret. Turns out he already had her number, having looked it up 3 weeks earlier after Lorraine kept turning him away at the door. 30 years in law enforcement had taught him exactly what isolation looks like. He'd just been waiting for me to ask. Margaret arrived at 7. I handed her my notebook. She read every page carefully, then closed it. "We file tomorrow morning, emergency protective order, and a petition for temporary sole custody. Your documentation is the centerpiece." She looked at my knee. "Get that photograph tonight." Ice it, but don't let the swelling go down completely before the hearing. Then to me, when you testify, speak the way you document. Calm. Specific. Clinical. I said, I've been doing that for 5 months. She said, I know. That's why we're going to win. That night the landline rang. Anthony, voice tight. Is Donna there? Is Lily there? My dad answered evenly. They're safe. Talk to her lawyer. Then Lorraine, loud enough to carry across the kitchen. Ray Caldwell, you have no right. That is my granddaughter. Bring them back, or I'll call the police. My dad was quiet for 3 seconds. Lorraine. I've known you 20 years. This is the last time I'm going to be polite about it. He hung up and unplugged the phone. I learned later what happened in that house afterward. Anthony sat frozen on the couch. Belle stood in the doorway, already calculating what this meant for her. Lorraine paced, heels clicking, then sank into the chair at the head of the table, the one no one else was allowed to sit in. And for one moment, her voice dropped to something none of them had ever heard. I can't lose another one, Anthony, she said. I can't. For one breath, she wasn't the woman who'd built a case file against me. She was a woman a man named Gerald had walked out on 21 years earlier, still waiting for that door to close again. Then she straightened, picked up her phone, and called her lawyer. File the petition, she said. Tonight. Margaret called an hour later to tell me Lorraine had filed first. I felt the floor shift for a moment. But here's what nursing taught me, the first person to write the chart doesn't win. The person with the accurate chart wins. The next morning, I put on scrubs. Not for work, because scrubs are my uniform, and a uniform reminds you who you are. Margaret arrived with a binder built from my notebook, printed, tabbed, my photographs of the petition, the title, and Dr. Mercer's letter all on glossy paper. Both petitions are heard together this morning. Hers and yours, same hearing. Her lawyer, she said, usually handled Lorraine's real estate, family law wasn't really his thing. For the first time, Margaret almost smiled. The courthouse was small, 20 seats, fluorescent lights, a water stain on the ceiling. Lorraine sat in a charcoal blazer and pearls, hair done, posture perfect. Anthony beside her in a sport coat I'd never seen. I sat down, set my binder in front of me, and folded my hands. I walked in wearing scrubs. She walked in wearing pearls. But I had 52 pages of the truth, dated and signed, and she didn't know it yet. Judge Carson entered, gray beard, reading glasses, a voice like gravel. Both petitions would be heard together, hers first. Her lawyer made his case smoothly, a concerned grandmother, an unstable mother, a doctor's letter, photos of me looking exhausted, statements from church friends. Then Lorraine took the stand and was magnificent, crying at exactly the right moments. I love my granddaughter more than anything in this world. I'm terrified that if we don't act, something terrible will happen to that baby. The gallery murmured. The judge's face gave away nothing. He wrote something down, then looked up. Respondents' counsel? Margaret stood, buttoned her jacket, and turned to me. Ms. Roswell, your witness. I stood, smoothed my scrubs the way I do before walking into a patient's room, and took the stand. Margaret asked me to describe the past 6 months. I looked around that courtroom, Lorraine watching me, calculating, waiting for the crack. I thought about her hand on my wrist that first dinner. Anthony's hand on my arm, my knee cracking against the door frame. Route 11, Lily's fist around my collar, and the notebook hidden under a bathroom sink in a house I'd never sleep in again. I opened my mouth and spoke the way I chart. No tears, no tremor, just dates, observations, assessments, one after another. The car keys, the very first night. The tracking app, the surveillance. And then entry 31, the locked drawer, the unsigned custody petition dated weeks before any conversation about my mental health ever happened, my hidden car title, and Dr. Mercer's letter, a diagnosis from a family physician with no psychiatric license and no authority to make that claim. I held up the photographs, side by side, both pulled from Lorraine's own drawer. The courtroom went silent. I heard the pastor's chair creak behind me. His expression had changed completely. He wasn't nodding anymore. Then Lorraine stood up. "That is a lie," she said, voice cracking. "She broke into my desk. She had no right." The judge's pen stopped. "Mrs. Roberts, I raised that boy," she said, pointing at Anthony, who shrank into his seat. "I gave them everything. And this is how she repays me?" "Mrs. Roberts," the judge said, his voice like a door slamming shut, "you will sit down, or I will have you removed." Lorraine trembled, hands clenched, the tendons in her wrists white. I could smell the bleach on her skin even from 5 feet away, the same desperate ritual, trying to control every surface. But she couldn't control this one. "She's sick," she whispered. "She's manipulating every one of you." Then she sat down. Behind her, the pastor's hands slid off his knees, open and uncertain. I sat completely still, hands folded, breathing even. The power in that room had flipped completely. She was shaking. I was calm. Margaret's closing was short, 52 documented incidents of coercive control, and the petitioner's entire case resting on a diagnosis from a doctor with no authority to make it. The injury documented that very morning met the legal threshold for an emergency order. The judge read his notes for 90 seconds, then ruled. Lorraine's petition for emergency custody, denied, insufficient grounds. My petition for an emergency protective order, granted, naming Anthony for physical contact and Lorraine for harassment. Temporary sole custody of Lily, granted to me, pending a full hearing within 30 days. And my car, titled in my name, to be returned within 48 hours. I let out a breath I'd been holding for 6 months. As we walked past Lorraine's table, Margaret paused just long enough to say quietly, "Mrs. Roberts, you should be grateful she's letting you see her at all." Lorraine said nothing. Her hands lay flat on the table. The bleach couldn't help her hear. In the hallway, Anthony stepped into my path, but stopped 2 feet away, hands open. "Donna, please. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I thought. I looked at him, 33 years old, in a borrowed sport coat, looking exactly like what he was, a man who'd let someone else do his thinking for so long he'd forgotten he had a mind of his own. "Your mother raised you to be afraid of a woman with a car key," I said. "I'm going to raise Lily to never be afraid of anything." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I walked past him, out into a parking lot where the sun hit the pavement and the air smelled like freedom. Belle was leaning against Lorraine's car, phone frozen in her hands. For the first time in 6 months, she had nothing to report. My dad was waiting on a bench, feeding Lily a bottle he'd warmed in his truck's cup holder. He took one look at my face and just gave me that slow, single nod, the same one he gave me at my nursing school graduation, at my mother's grave, and at my wedding. The nod that means, "I see you. I'm proud." The pastor caught up to us at the doors, his face drawn. "Donna, I didn't know. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I shifted Lily onto my hip. "You believed what you saw, Pastor. Most people do." We drove home on Route 11, the same road I'd limped down a day earlier. The asphalt looked the same. But this time I sat with a seatbelt across my chest, my daughter behind me, and a court order in a binder on my lap. And I was choosing every mile. 2 weeks later, Lily and I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment 4 miles from my dad's place. I bought a simple brass key hook from the same hardware store where I'd met Anthony, and hung it by the door on our first night. My car key went on it. The car had been dropped off at my dad's driveway 46 hours after the ruling, exactly as ordered. I drove it home with the windows down. In the months that followed, the pieces fell into place. Margaret filed for divorce through a legal aid grant. The protective order was extended to 2 full years, no contact from Anthony or Lorraine. Lorraine's custody petition was dismissed permanently. I filed a complaint against Dr. Mercer with the state medical board, and he received an official reprimand. Belle moved out of Lorraine's house by August. Anthony pleaded no contest to simple assault, community service, and mandatory anger management. Our divorce was finalized that December. I went back to work at the hospital. My supervisor met me on my first day. "We held your position. Lorraine called and said you were on leave, but we couldn't reach you to confirm anything. Your phone was disconnected, your emails bounced. It didn't add up, so we left the slot open. I started seeing a therapist that fall, my choice, my schedule, a practice I drove myself to. Not because Lorraine had been right about me. Because she'd been wrong, and I needed help understanding how a competent, educated woman could spend 6 months under a roof slowly closing in around her, and still believe she could fix it from the inside. My therapist's answer was simple. I could. I just needed different tools. Here's what I know now. Gratitude is real, but gratitude is not a leash. No one gets to tell you to be grateful for the very roof they're using to trap you. Your car keys belong to you. Your phone belongs to you. Your daughter belongs with you. And the door that someone else locks from the outside has always opened from your side. You just have to decide to push. Last night, Lily and I walked up our own driveway. The gravel crunched under my shoes, not bare feet, shoes, and I chose every single step. If this story reminded you to trust what your gut has been telling you, do something about it today. And if you know someone living in a house that doesn't feel like home anymore, send them this video. Thank you for being here, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.